Well, welcome to another edition of Carnivore Bites. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with Dr. Eric Lopkin. And I want to start with something that's kind of light, but maybe not so light. You know, we talked about, we're not the only ones, about go woke and go broke. I think I've added to that, and that's is go woke and choke. The women's soccer team blowing it. And also, not even that, but tying an opponent, I don't recall off the top of my head, that they should have easily defeated, instead of going into the locker room and kicking the lockers and whatever, getting pissed off, they were taking selfies and signing autographs for the fans. So I don't think a lot of Americans really gave a shit that they lost. In fact, I think behind the scenes, a lot of people were happy that weren't woke themselves.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, and I know there's a segment of the audience that will get annoyed that I say this, but it's soccer. Who cares? More than that, though, the women's soccer team has been so obnoxious.
That's my
I
point,
mean,
yes.
yeah, it's
Just
like they need to just shut up. They're talking
and go
about how,
away, and I'm glad they lost.
yeah, they're talking
And then
about
when they
how
lost to
there's no
Sweden,
big deal. Yeah, there's no big deal about trans men playing on women's team because they don't have an advantage. The U.S. women's soccer team, again, prior to this, won 2 World Cups. So allegedly the best women's soccer team in the world. They lost to a bunch of high school boys. So saying that there's no advantage to being male, they have no basis for this. They're just, it's a woke team. They want their moment in the sun, and you know what? They're over. Go away.
and they squandered it too. They were never happy. They didn't put their hand. First, they didn't. Some of them didn't kneel or did kneel, and they didn't put their hearts, the hand on their hearts. Total embarrassment to the United States. Whereas Sweden, the team they should have beaten when they won, were just singing patriotic songs. Good riddance. How does that sound?
Exactly. Hopefully, we won't have to hear from them again. This was an embarrassing loss, as well it should have been, because you know what? Maybe they should have been practicing more and preaching less.
There, that's it in a nutshell. And worrying about, all these extracurriculars, I think it would have been better to take a ball and how about kick it and head it. There you go. Now we have riots in New York City. An influencer, a social media influencer, put out the word that they were giving away free PlayStations. Why is this important? Because it ended up to a couple things. Eric Adams proved himself again to be, let's just say, not a Mensa candidate. Number two, I think the biggest thing, this is huge for me. When are we going to stop making excuses? 60 years after the Great Society, engineered strategically, maybe not on purpose, to permanently dismantle the blacks in America. We have what's becoming a permanent underclass of black youths that have no father, no really intact family, and no education, a la Baltimore. We're not, you can't make this up, not 10%, not 20%, 0% past basic math or reading credentials or requirements. Where are these people going to be in 10 years? And forget why. What's about all these excuses?
Yeah, the problem breaks down to 2 different issues. The first one, which you mentioned, is education.
Or
Our
lack thereof.
kids, right? Our kids are not being educated. The teachers union has pushed their woke agenda. They're not learning math. They're not learning reading. They're not learning basic skills to survive.
Wait, let me interject something. I agree with that. Okay. There's issues overall, especially when you look at the Department of Education, where I think the Vic wants to get rid of, and I support him on that, because we were number 3 in education. Now whatever. They essentially dead last in the industrial. But no, that it's worse than that, Dr. Lopkin, because yes, is there a problem in our educational system? Yes. I mean, no doubt. Okay, we got all that. But especially in the young African American sector, it's not bad. It's horrific. Even things like truancy is like in the 30 percentile. So, you talk about reparations, okay? Uh, Stop playing the victim because you're doing it to yourself. Sorry to be so blunt.
Yeah, we need to fix the education system. We need to go back to teaching the basics: math, reading,
Yeah, no, I get that, but I'm talking about
phonics.
specifically in the
Yes.
black community. Yes, is it bad all over, Dr. Lopkin? Yes, but it's not zero. Is my point. Okay,
No,
it's a huge problem.
well, no, again, in Baltimore, it is zero. And that
Yeah,
wasn't
and it's
just African,
primarily a black city.
but it's the entire education system. I don't know if you ever watched a show, The Wire, that was on HBO a while back. This is going back years. The whole thing was set in Baltimore, and they had one season that basically focused on the Baltimore school system. And they talked about the fact that they weren't teaching kids. They were basically just teaching them to pass state tests. They were they didn't even worry about truancy. They just tried to get kids into the schools twice a month, 2 days out of the month, because that was enough to qualify them for the state money. So this is not this is going
Okay,
on all over
but
the
no, but
country.
Baltimore is essentially a black city. Okay, it's if you go to places, I'm not going to name the towns. You don't have that problem. You don't have a problem with all other kids rioting to the propensity that it's happening in the African American community. You have fatherless households. The thing is getting off the rails. Sorry, it just is.
But it is off the rails. And that goes to the second point where people refuse to hold these kids responsible.
Yes,
We had
thank you.
we had riots in Chicago, and a reporter referred to this as a mob. Okay? Now, mob is not a racial description. It's simply a description of a group of people who just sort of, got violent. And the mayor pushed back saying, oh, no, no, we can't call them a mob. It's like, yes, you call it what it is. Stop trying to coddle these kids. It's not working. Arrest them, give them a criminal record, and force them to stay in the damn schools and fix the school system. That's the
And I
only way this is going to resolve itself.
100% agree, but I also want your analysis, your input on this as well. I think it's having another effect that's never talked about. I think there's a silent group of people, and I think it's growing, that are basically essentially saying, cry me a river, because they see that, yeah, there's some racism, but it's not exactly 1960. Essentially, they're doing it to themselves.
I'm not sure if there's a group of people that are saying they're doing it to themselves. Certainly on the far right, there is. But I think there's a larger well, not so silent majority, because it includes quite a lot of parents who, by the way, were targeted by the Justice Department as potential terrorists, who are coming out and saying, no, this is the result of what you are teaching. And they're going to school board meetings because these kids are being told, you're victims. There's nothing you can do about it. They're not being taught the skills that they need to survive in the world. They're essentially being abandoned by this woke agenda that is all about victimhood.
Okay,
And
and I think it transcends school. It is school. So I'm not,
yes,
yeah, but it's also permeated the entire society. It's not your fault. Don't worry about it. And basically giving them a free pass, which is fine when you're a kid. Eventually, you're going to have to make a living, I would assume, and it's not going to end well,
No,
especially in an increasingly technologically advanced society.
it's not going to end well. And we're already seeing part of this as employers are forcing people to go back to the office at least a few days a week. It is being reported that the younger generation who maybe entered the job force during COVID or just before COVID, they have no social skills. They can't deal with people in the office. They're all stressed out because they can't handle human interaction. Now, put on top of that, not even learning basic skills, these kids are screwed.
Well, how about America? Competitive
Oh, the,
advantage, I believe it's called.
well, our
That's
competitive
gone out the
advantage
window
is
too.
gone.
It's gone. Thank you. We agree 100% by that. And you're right. It's you have a whole again, COVID was no one's fault. The education is another issue, but certainly you have a whole imagine this a whole group of your up and comers. I mean, that's what business is not based on 60-plus-year-old people. It's the young generation that is the infamous for innovation, for different strategies, business outlooks, all that kind of stuff. They're incapable, as you said, skill wise and also socially. That doesn't look good.
No, it doesn't. And we're already seeing in the marketplace the results of this. Apple made a push to bring their people back into the office, and the workers pushed back, saying, no, we don't want to come back to the office. We're perfectly capable of doing great work from the house. What's the result of this? Apple has been turning out flawed products for the last several years with major gaffes. On top of that, the Bureau of Labor Statistics came out saying productivity for people who are working at home is 2 to 4% less than it is for the people who returned to the office. So, no, we are not good at working at home. People are not really doing work. Uh, this just came up in a lawsuit. A woman who was working at home was
I love this.
fired.
Yeah, keystrokes.
Yes, they were tracking her keystrokes. And by her keystrokes, the employer was able to tell that she was not working. She was not at her workstation. There were days when she didn't do anything, and they fired her for that. She took them to court, and the court said, no, they've got the evidence that you were not working. The case stands. You were fired for cause.
Dr. Lopkin, I think it was a free pass during COVID. Okay, no one checked. It was just that's the way it was. I think that two things. I think that train's completely left the station. Yes, they're going to be counting your keystrokes, time logged in, all that kind of stuff. And also, I think that there's the bigger issue, and that is, I worked for a couple companies and we innovated some really cool stuff because it was a team effort. And I know that's overused, but it really was, right?
Right.
We'd be kicking around some ideas in the office, in the conference room, throwing out different samples. Yeah, that looks good. That looks like shit. Whatever. How do you even build? How do you build a company culture? Whenever and this company, by the way, is Stanley Black and Decker. They literally, you can't make this up. Okay, you talk about Apple. They don't have any offices anymore. Yeah, they have a corporate office just for show, but everyone works from home. And guess what? For the first time in over 150 years, they lost money.
Well,
150 years.
they lost money because of abject stupidity.
Thank you very much.
They opened a factory in
In Texas.
that was
Yeah.
going to build craftsman tools, and they automated the entire thing. Well, what happened? They bought the automation machinery from a company in Belarus. The machinery kept breaking down every time they needed a replacement part. it had to come from Belarus. Who is buying serious technical equipment from the former Soviet
Why not
Union?
just go to Uganda? It might be even
Uh,
cheaper.
I mean,
There
this
you
was
go.
absolutely ridiculous. But no, we know that the work at home movement is coming to an end because Zoom has required their employees to come back to the office.
Interesting. I know that Zoom stocks is basically much down from its previous peak. But anyway, speaking of stupidity and Biden, they're synonymous. First of all, on kind of a lighter note, he goes to Arizona. There's a border crisis. And what happens? He does not address that or even go to the border, but he does a hard hitting interview on the Weather Channel. But even in that, you couldn't understand a friggin' word. I mean, I don't no idea what he was talking about. He's like, yes, we have declared a climate emergency. Why is that important? He refuses to address the border, but I think I don't know how it works out in the campaign. I think he's so blown out that he couldn't give an interview in like nursery school. I mean, it's
No,
bad.
no, his last several appearances have been abject failures. We'll see what happens when he finally has to debate someone, because I don't think he can handle it. But in terms of his trip to Arizona, I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. The federal government is giving New York City $12 billion to deal with the migrants that have come to New York, which of course completely set off Kirsten Cinema, because they're not giving Arizona and Texas anything. And Arizona and Texas are dealing with 100 times the crisis that New York City is. The
Mm-hmm.
government is giving money to liberal sanctuary cities to help them, but they're not giving anything to the border states that are actually dealing with the problem.
Total gross incompetency. There's been further talk about Mayorkas, about possible impeachment. I'm 100% on board with that.
Yeah, no, I'm actually not. They need to stop talking about impeachment, because the fact of the matter is they don't have the votes in the Senate. Nothing they present is going to get them the votes in the Senate. So this is a waste of time. What they should be doing is pushing forward on legislation that, quite frankly, given the border situation, they can get bipartisan support, force it down Biden's throat, and fix the problem.
Well, it needs to be fixed. Mayorkas is another one. If you looked at Biden's cabinet, it's a freak show, and Mayorkas is a part of that. They were all talking about hearings. They had the hearing into Biden, the boy genius's Afghan withdrawal, and that, of course, didn't make it on major media, but it did make it on some more conservative outlets. Totally disgusting. We talked about this almost 2 years ago. He went up to a grieving mother at the time, still grieving, obviously, and says, Jill and I know how you feel. Bo came home in a flag draped coffin. A lie, and how heartless. If you're going to lie about bullshit that you were like a UPenn professor, even though you basically I don't know how he even got a law degree. And by the way, I'm sorry to say Syracuse isn't exactly Yale Law School, but we won't go into that. So how do you do that to a grieving mother? And more importantly, I saw a great news segment, great little editorial segment last night about how sick this guy is, Biden, that he continuously parlays his tragedies into his own advantage, starting with the car crash. He said it was the truck driver that hit the car was drunk. He was not. This guy's a cold son of a bitch, including the fact he's looking at his watch while while the coffins are getting sent off the plane.
Well, he has always been an egocentric asshole. Nobody
Yes.
counts but him. Everything he has done has been to benefit himself. Now that he's got dementia, I don't even know that he's aware that other people are around, never mind that they matter. The hearings were a travesty. There was nothing that any Democrat could say to defend that pullout. It was an abject disaster. And now, not only did we hand Afghanistan over to the Taliban, we are sending money to the
Yes,
Taliban, which is
billions.
obviously not getting to the Afghani people. It's being used to fund terrorism. So we handed them a safe space. We're giving them money that's going to come back when there's a terrorist attack here in America.
I would agree with all of that, Dr. Lopkin. But again, it's not. It's funny. Well, it's not funny. It's tragic. I mean, how dumb can you be? And I blame the press because no one probably even knows about it to give terrorists money. I mean, and the other thing is, I mean, what really bothers me and keeps me up at night actually is we cannot afford another 4 years of numbnuts. Usually, you can have a president. You can have Obama. Was he the greatest? No, he wasn't. But America, it would survive. I'm not so sure with this idiot. This
Well,
guy is that stupid.
I don't actually think that there's a danger in him serving another 4 years. I think there's a danger of him winning the election and Kamala serving for 3 of those
Okay, no,
years.
that's better,
Uh,
and
y-
you've clarified it. But
No,
him winning the election, holy cow! And
no,
that's why Trump pisses me off because he's the only one who can lose.
yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. And of course, they're making all of these excuses. We have two people in charge that don't have five functioning brain cells between them. And now the story out of the vice President, oh, it's because she's a black woman. No, it's because every time she opens her mouth, she says something moronic. The same thing with Biden. It's not the problem that, oh, he's a white male. He's got almost as bad an approval rating as she does. And Jake Tapper, and oh, I didn't catch the reporter from NPR who he was talking with on a CNN panel. But Jake Tapper was talking about the fact that he cannot believe 3 years into the Biden administration, people still have such a high disapproval rating. He can't understand it. And the NPR is like, well, because it's not connecting, because the American public doesn't feel that inflation is going down. You know why the American public doesn't feel that inflation is
Because it's
going down?
not.
Because it's not. The
There you go.
rate that inflation is going up has slowed. But when you hear it's 4% inflation, that's 4% over a year ago, which was 9% inflation. It has not gone down. And in fact, you can go online. There are websites that will actually do the calculations for you. Since Biden took office, real inflation is actually up 17.89%, not 4%. 17.89. That's why when you go to the supermarket, when you fill up your car with gas, you're looking at these prices and going, I cannot believe this.
I understand that. Now, let's look at that. Saudis are going to cut back production even more because they hate this guy. That's one of the reasons. I'm sorry to say that to you, but it's true. If gas goes 425, 450, approval ratings further down.
Oh, yes.
And if you look at this, hold on. If you look at this, New York Times just did a poll 43-43 Trump Biden. I still think Trump could win.
Oh, almost everybody, all of the pundits think that Trump still has a chance to win, even the liberal ones. That's why they keep pushing these indictments, because they're terrified of Trump winning another term and showing. Remember, when Trump was in office, I'm not a fan of the man as a person, but unemployment was at record lows. The economy was at record highs. The stock market was at record highs. We were energy independent. And Biden got rid of all of that. And now he's claiming, oh, well, it's my policies that got unemployment to record lows. No, it's the fact that the crisis of coronavirus is over. The economy is starting to go back to where it was before you screwed it up.
100% agreed. And the other thing, you talk about the indictments, probably another one coming his way from Georgia. And there's also the possible gag order that prosecutor Smith or District Attorney Smith might impose. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I actually don't think that, based on some of the comments that the judge has made, I don't think the judge is going to issue a gag order, especially given the Justice Department's habit of leaking information to the press in regards to Trump's indictments. And in fact, the New York Times got a hold of a memo that was written that is part of the indictment for the January 6th. What's really hysterical is this memo, which does detail plans on how they could overturn the election. The memo was written by a judge, not a judge, a lawyer, I believe in Wisconsin, who, while a pro Trump lawyer, was not affiliated with Donald Trump. It was sent to another lawyer who was working on the Trump campaign. There's no evidence that anything in this memo was ever acted on. There's no evidence that Trump even saw this memo. But this is the so-called evidence that they're using. They've already leaked it to the New York Times, but they don't want Trump to be able to comment on it. So I don't think the judge is going to allow that. This is a gag order, not as a usual gag order is used. This is trying to keep Trump from exercising freedom of speech during a presidential campaign.
Now, the bigger issue, Dr. Lopkin, is, with Georgia about to drop another indictment, is this the boy that cried wolf? Like, it gets to be white noise after a while. I mean, the first year with bated breath, is it losing credit? I mean, come on. I mean, okay, one set of it, well, hold on, one set of indictments, I get 20 indictments, don't you think? Okay, this is a little ridiculous.
Yeah, it has already lost its impact. Democrats in swing states have refused to talk about the indictments, the last few. Most pundits, with the exception of a couple, are going, yes, there was another indictment, and they're moving on. As far as I can tell, there's a handful of people at MSNBC and the ladies of The View who giggle in giddiness every time this happens. But outside of them, nobody cares anymore. And in fact, it's just energized the conservative base and, quite frankly, put off the independents, because independents are now looking at this going, oh, they revealed more information about Biden, so they hit Trump with another indictment. It's become very obvious that there is a two-tiered system of justice. And even people that don't like Trump don't want to see a two-tiered system of justice, because anybody with half a brain is going to tell you that that's going to backfire. The Democrats are not going to be in charge forever, and everything they do is going to come back on them. This is why we have a Supreme Court with a 6-3 conservative majority, because Harry Reid got tired of Republicans filibustering Obama's judicial picks, so he did away with the filibuster. which gave Trump the ability to put through all of his picks.
Well, isn't it another bigger issue with all these indictments? Um, we history. You talk about our Constitution, the founding fathers. That and Jesus Christ itself are pretty much on the same level. When it comes right down to it, we've de-evolved to a bananica bullshit republic. This is bullshit. You mean, and Jack Smith can just, and he's basically a Democratic operative. His wife is joined at the hip in Democratic causes, Hillary in particular. This is something right out of Venezuela, a la 1960.
It really is. And unfortunately, what most people don't realize, because of course the mainstream media doesn't want to cover this, there were some mentions over the last week that Moody's downgraded the United States debt rating. Well, Biden made a comment that this is, the Republicans' fault because they didn't want to raise the debt ceiling. It's like, no, if you read the notes that Moody's put out, it is because of this political infighting and the indictments and the fact that this is going back and forth, tit for tat. And that is what is eroding confidence in America. It has nothing to do, well, I mean, it has something to do with the debt ceiling, but the fact of the matter is, it's not that the Republicans didn't want to raise the debt ceiling. It was, and they said this in the notes, that the government seems to want to just keep increasing spending without any concern about how they're going to pay that money back.
And I think that is an actuality. That is a fact. Again, looking historically, I remember the debt in the 1980 was a half a trillion, $500 billion. They thought that Reagan thought that was an outrage. I think when Reagan left office, remember how we foolishly increased the debt? The debt was probably maybe 3 trillion. I mean, 10 times that, over 10 times. It's unsustainable. And yeah, I'm surprised we have that higher rating. Now, you talk about the indictments. James Comer's basically released more documents today, and there's about 20 million going into bank transfers, the Biden crime family. I feel, in spite of the corporate mainstream media, this thing has to have legs eventually.
It has to. And what Comer released was a memo detailing the findings of the committee with screenshots of the bank records. So they had, now the bank records were partially redacted, but they have released the bank records showing the shell companies that the Bidens set up, showing the 20 million being funneled to the Biden family. You cannot say, oh, well, they don't have anything. They have released the evidence. It is online for anybody to look at. So,
except for the mainstream corporate media.
Right, of course they're going to ignore this because it doesn't match their narrative. Now, I have to wonder,
isn't there a responsibility to report the news?
Well, if they were actual news organizations, they would, but they're not. They're propaganda organizations now. Now, what I'm wondering is, because it was released today, specifically this morning, does that mean the Georgia indictment is going to hit tomorrow? Because every time more evidence comes out against the Bidens, they hit Trump with another indictment.
I would have to say, unfortunately, you are correct. Well, you know that President Biden was on the Weather Channel. And speaking of weather, I don't really think of leftists as that industrious, but there are some, because now you have something called, that sprung up, climate change therapists. that are people that can deal with Generation Z or whatever, who are so traumatized by rising temperatures that they need a therapist. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I applaud the people who are doing this because they saw, I'm a business coach. These folks found a niche. They're making money off the niche. Good for them. I think it's a sad statement that anybody needs this. If you are that traumatized, please just, you don't need a climate change therapist. You need a therapist.
Thank you very much.
You need to put your big boy pants on, grow the hell up, and face the world. And it is
And,
and this goes back to what we were talking about with the education system. Less so K through 12, but more the college system, where there has been for over a decade this focus on, well, they need a safe space, they need to not deal with things. It's like, no, they need to get tough, they need to learn what the real world is like and how to handle it.
Dr. Lopkin, may I share with you the real focus of today's college? It's
Go
called
ahead.
equity.
Yeah.
Equity. No, not achievement, not excellence. It's equity, which really means dumbing it down to the lowest common denominator. Just thought I'd throw that in there. But
Yes.
no, you have even really good schools that were once focused on excellence, like even stupid stuff like halftime commercials. Just hear me out. You'd have, I'm not going to name the university, XYZ University, and they'd say, number 3 in, biotech, number 4 in. Now, that same school is diversity and inclusion. Oh, my God.
Now, the question is, how are they going to change now that the Supreme Court said they can't use race as a factor in admissions? And
No, it's all the whole. It's still more of like a safe space kind of mentality. Inclusion. No one's ever going to be offended. Don't worry about it. We respect anything. It's just nothing about education as America loses its competitive edge globally. It's all about feeling good and inclusion. Don't worry, you flunked the test, but you know what inclusion really means? No one flunks because everyone's included. Sorry, just telling you.
That is the problem with these equity programs. They completely failed to raise up the folks that needed it. So, in the name of equity, they're pushing down the folks at the top. And that doesn't
And that
help
even gets
anyway.
back to George W., who I thought was a crappy, shitty president, about no child. Guess what? Some children should be left behind. You don't dumb things down so some knucklehead can pass. Sorry.
I'm gonna go back. No Child Left Behind was a horrible program,
Thank
the
you.
idea behind it was correct. You don't leave children behind. It is the job of the educational system to figure out how to help those kids. When I was in elementary school, the smartest kids were given extra work to keep them busy. And part of what we had to do was to tutor the slower kids and help them pass and work with them. A rising tide raises all boats. We need to raise the tide,
And
not
that's we're
push
saying it
people
different
down.
ways. We're saying it different ways, but we're essentially agreeing. That's it. So you're taking away aspirations and trading it into mediocrity. That's what's going on.
Exactly. And we are seeing this effect. We're seeing it in business with this new generation of, oh, I don't want to go back to the office. I don't want to have to work that hard. The United Auto Workers Union just served the big 3 automakers with contract demands. They want 40% raises across the board, and they want the work week cut to 32 hours. So, really? Union workers used to be proud of the fact that They were there, committed to quality. They were getting the job done. Now, oh, I don't want to have to work on Fridays.
Well, it's 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 prevalent throughout the workforce. I don't know how we recover. Right where when our own domestic car business is less than completely healthy, and even to that point, that Ford Motor Company loses an astounding amount on every electric car they produce, but the government's
Oh,
essentially quasi forcing them to produce that.
yes, and
It's almost forced bankruptcy.
at this point, all of the electric car manufacturers have more inventory than there is demand. They can't sell everything they have. And that the government is going to end up bailing them out again because the government forced them to make these ridiculous cars that nobody wants. And
And
even
I'll go,
people that bought the the electric cars are now having buyer's remorse, going, it doesn't go as far as I thought it was, it takes forever to charge, it's not worth the money.
something, if government, which is something they should always do, if they did nothing and let people like Musk and others take control. Elon Musk, Tesla, it wasn't a government program. Government get out of the way, and things. Government's going to have no positive impact. In fact, a negative. They'll squelch innovation. How does that sound? By these crappy bullshit initiatives and
They,
forced mandates.
they always do. Anytime they push a mandate, it is an abject disaster. And in fact, I saw an interview with a guy that owns appliance stores, and he was talking about the new energy efficient washers and dryers. And they said, yes, they use 30 to 40% less energy. But to get your clothes clean, you have to wash them twice because they don't work. This is what's happening. So you're not actually saving any energy. You're not saving any money. You're not saving the environment. You are actually just putting a band-aid on a gaping hole.
Well, it's about a mentality, though, Dr. Lopkin. Some shithead moron in New York, a legislator, basically was trying to get a law passed that the ice cream vendors should be prevented from having diesel or gas powered generators, to keep their coolers and the ice cream, and go to solar or some type of non fossil fuel. I mean, really, like that has any impact on the greenhouse gases or
It, it's
global
not
warming?
it's not
Push
going to have any impact. And more than
zero.
that, most of these ice cream vendors are entrepreneurs. They're not big companies that own, big fleets of trucks. These are guys that own their truck, and they saved their money and they bought the franchise for whatever company that they're selling. They can't afford to convert to a
Yeah, but
solar
if you went to
power.
NYU and your daddy paid for it and you never really worked and now you're in the New York City legislature, you've never really worked a day in your life. You just think money because daddy gave you everything. So why shouldn't these people just have money? Doesn't everyone just have money?
And that's the problem. The intellectuals are out of. In fact, there was a great editorial in the New York Times a week and a half ago talking about the fact that the liberal elite are out of touch with most of America. And this is why there's such a backlash against them, because people are feeling targeted, because they feel, oh, we're so superior. We've got advanced degrees and we have all of that money that, and guess what? Most people did not grow up like that. Most people looked at $100,000, $200,000 in debt for a graduate degree and were smart enough to say, That's not worth it.
Yes, and you also have companies. We'll talk about one of my companies, Stanley, we just mentioned.
Yep.
I love this. This stuff, this fascinates me. All the geniuses with the MBAs from Hector and Carl University and all this bullshit you could have a kid, just a kid, just hanging around and do a better job than all the geniuses who took brand names that you just let them go on their own. Craftsman, Stanley, DeWalt, Black and Decker. But no, the geniuses ran all of them into the ground.
Oh
Yep,
yeah,
all the spreadsheets, all
MB
the
no
analysis.
MBAs have destroyed more companies than any other group. And if you look at the companies that they've created, you can't name any. Name companies that were started by folks without college degrees. Oh, Microsoft, Facebook,
It's like a
Apple,
who's list.
Ford. Yes, Ford. Um,
You name it. It's like almost
you
every
know,
company. There you go. You
right?
just had brilliant people.
All of the Virgin companies, that Richard Branson has, all of Elon Musk's
But
company.
but but wait a second. We talked about this on the show on the podcast. I think I think your theory. I don't know when it's going to happen, if it's ever going to happen. But the whole thing about if I was an employer and I'm looking at some man or woman, boy or girl that had the smorgasbord, the buffet of skills that they are like STEM proficient, and let's say they weren't great writers, you get a writing, basically the skills they went after the skills. I have to say, and I really was a huge believer in the college education. I have to say, if I'm looking at a kid coming into a job interview, I have to say I'm looking a little more positively on that than some kid who went to Trinity and got a degree in I don't know, art history. Really?
Yes, it's already starting. Google has rolled out certification programs that you can take for free online.
But is
And
it getting traction in the workforce?
yes, because IT companies are looking at those Google certifications. They're not looking for somebody with a graduate degree, unless, of course, it's MIT. But tech companies are looking at high school students, not even college students. They don't care what your degree is anymore. They want to know you have the skills. And that is starting to be more and more prevalent. Unless you want to work on Wall Street, your MBA is useless now.
Do you know why I think that? And it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. It's experience that happened. In other words, the NBA started in the early 80s, and even the whole, well, let's just focus on NBAs. Yes, 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 the best and the brightest, blah, 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 blah. And then after 40 years later, companies have realized these guys don't know shit. So there's no value to it. It didn't. And I have a friend who works in advertising, great guy. Here's another guy, no college degree, but I'd hire him in 5 seconds, literally, not just because he's a friend. He's brilliant. And he has a whole thing. He goes, beware of the unintended consequences of an
Yep.
MBA. They can take, and I've been there, they can take going to the bathroom like launching the space shuttle by the time
A-
they're done with it.
Absolutely. I worked as a contractor for a pharmaceutical company back in the early 2000s. And I was there for 18 months. And the woman I reported to was a newly minted MBA. And she didn't know anything. And when I left at the end of the 18 months that my project lasted, I asked for an evaluation of the work. And I got a great evaluation of the work. And she said, the only complaint that I have is that whenever we talked, it always felt that you were trying to teach me. And all I could think was, well, if you'd been doing it right in the first place, I wouldn't have to be teaching you.
There you go. Yes, I can
Now,
completely understand that.
the
Speaking of
upshot, hang on a second. The
go.
upshot of the story though is that I went back to that pharmaceutical company for another project that was basically a continuation of the project that I had led in the first place. Not only was this woman gone, she had basically gutted the department. It was a complete failure.
Surprise,
Yeah.
surprise. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me in any way. Um, let's see what else we have here. Oh, speaking of excellence, the Oakland Fentanyl Island. Have you heard of that? It is an island. You cannot make. It's like that movie you were around then, 1981, Escape from New York City.
Yeah.
This is an island that's part of Oakland. Okay, thank God the A's are moving out, which is literally
So are
a
the Raiders.
precursor. What? And the Raiders, they're
And
already
the
gone. But
Raiders.
yep. Um, it is a precursor, hopefully not, of what cities are becoming. It's a literally escape from New York City. It's fires, drug addicts, um, everything you could ever imagine in an island, on an island. And essentially, it even gets worse than that because they've had, and it's been going on for a while, they have activist groups, right? They're getting paid. So they give them a couple $100,000. They're going to do that. And nothing, it's all a scam. Nothing happens. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. It's just a living hellhole.
Yeah, and
And
this
it's
is
under
what is happening.
Gavin Newsom is ultimately responsible, the person that just voted for to legalize pedophilia. So he can't be too bright, can he?
No, he can't. This guy thinks he's going to run for president. And on Monday, he signed a bill saying that pedophiles would not be prosecuted if they were within 10 years of the child's age, which means a 20-year-old can be having sex with a 10-year-old and face no consequences. This is what has happened to California. This is what has happened to San Francisco and Oakland. We're starting, I mean, take a look at the cities: San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, Portland, Chicago. These used to be the crown jewels of America.
Well, let
And
me
they,
interject one thing. A friend of mine went to Austin, used to be the
oh,
Boston, and he was shocked. It's like a living shithole now.
10 years ago, I was actually looking into moving to Austin. And I thank God I never did, but I took them immediately off the list when their city council defunded the police. And since they did that, this city has fallen apart. This used to be the number one small city in America. It was a mecca for small businesses.
Art.
And now it is a disaster.
Yes, and let's hope it doesn't de-evolve into another fentanyl island. But if you saw that, you would freak out. Um, Someone who might be freaking out is DeSantis. Big shakeup in his staff. He's now in single digits in New Hampshire. Your comments, Dr. Lopkin.
Yeah, I think more is being made out of it than needs to be. First of all, I keep saying this every week, but the poll numbers at this point don't mean anything. Take a look at every past presidential election. This far out, the polls were wrong on everything on both sides. So the poll numbers don't mean anything. Most campaigns go through growing pains and trying to figure out what it is they're trying to be. So that's not unusual either. The mainstream media wants this to be a big deal because they all know if DeSantis managed to win, and let's face it, if Trump implodes, which is still possible, DeSantis does stand a chance. So the mainstream media doesn't want DeSantis having a shot at the presidency. They don't want any Republican having a
But
shot.
let me
So
ask you a question.
anything that's
Let me ask you a
negative.
question to this. Let me ask you a question because I strongly believe Trump is among the weakest candidates. Okay, so what is their obsession with Trump? I mean, that could go on for another hour. But the point is, Vivek. I think he would kick Biden's ass from. It would be a landslide. He says this, but I agree with him. Like the Reagan landslide. I believe he would destroy. He's got none of the baggage. So there's other people, and I think actually DeSantis would win over Biden. I
Well,
think almost anyone in the Republican field.
and you just answered your own question. That's why the media is focused on Trump. They want to convince the electorate, particularly the Republicans, that a Trump presidency is inevitable. So why bother voting for anybody else? Because they want the Trump rematch because they think Biden can beat him again. Their own polls are showing that's not necessarily the case. But
Well,
they
here's what
are.
I think of this. Here's what I think of this, and I think, and I've given this a great deal of thought or a fair amount of thought. I think the winds are headed in Biden's disadvantage. Okay, they're against him. You got the, certain time. I don't care what mainstream corporate media. You can't hide from the truth forever. You got bank records. That's not going to be good. You're going to have an impeachment inquiry. That's not going to be good. I'm not for impeachment. The inquiry is a different story. It lets more information out. And then you're going to have, there were certain economic forecasters, they've done it before and they were wrong, but thinking that fourth quarter there could be some economic turbulence, gas prices. I think it doesn't, and then obviously an international crisis is always a possibility, especially with numbnuts. So I think the headwinds, there are headwinds on the Biden agenda. And again, like I said this maybe 6 months ago, if your house is on fire, do you really give a shit that the fireman is an asshole? I don't personally. Put out the
there
friggin' fire.
there are a lot of headwinds, and of course the mainstream media tries to downplay these or even ignore them. But last week, a fleet of Chinese and Russian ships held battle maneuvers off the coast of Alaska. Do you really think they would ever have done that if they didn't think Biden was incredibly weak? They
Of
wouldn't
course not.
have dared done that during a Trump presidency. Or quite frankly, even during a George W.'s presidency, they wouldn't have done that.
No, I agree, but I also think it's, yes, Biden's weak. That's 80% of it. But then he could also be compromised. I think a lot of people in the international community, a lot of adversaries, have a lot of dirt on Lunch Pail Joe.
Oh, it wouldn't surprise me. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's one of the reasons. Now, I I agree with the decision that we need to back Ukraine because Russia won't stop if they overtake Ukraine. But I believe the reason that Biden has basically looked at this as a blank check is the fact that Zelensky's got all of the Burisma data.
There you go. And it's like, pay up or I'm going to start talking.
Yes.
There's nothing, there's no outcomes tied to any of the money we get. There's nothing. It's just a blank check, as you said. But I will, speaking of, we're talking about the potential international conflicts. Oliver Stone, hardly a conservative, was on an interview and basically said he regrets voting for Biden because he's scared of his incompetency and how it can translate into a nuclear war. Might be dramatic, but maybe yes, maybe no. You have players on the stage, a miscalculation. He's got dementia. You overdo things. He also has a macho complex. He's always had it since he was 40. You don't know. I don't feel confident with him at the helm. And that's just being partisan. That's a fact.
Yeah, Oliver Stone is probably the highest profile person to come out and say this, but it's a common sentiment among Biden voters. They regret voting for him because he has been an abject disaster. Any centrist that voted for him looks at what he became and went, this is not what I voted for. I voted for somebody who was going to be the adult in the room, who
A
was going to
uniter.
bring people together, and who was going to be a centrist. That was what he campaigned on. All of it was an abject lie, and people regret voting for him, which is another reason, he keeps trying to push through student loan forgiveness. All that is a bribe to young voters, because young voters look at him and go, you've done nothing for us. You're an old fart. Go away.
There you go. And we'll close on. I thought it was also, again, he escaped to the beach after the cocaine. Obviously, and I saw some videos of Hunter on the patio or on the deck. He was obviously coked up. And the other funny thing is, just as an aside, I think it was Gutfeld was talking about the Biden family. Essentially, it's the white trash family that you don't want next to you. I didn't know how it was. I didn't know it was that
Yes.
bad. Like the daughter, a couple DUI, a couple arrests. I mean, it's like white trash.
Yes, this is not a high class family.
No, they're
This is
grifters.
Yes, they've conned their way into politics. They've conned their way into Burisma and all of these selling, basically because they're selling access to Joe. This is a white trash family. Now, I'm not going to say that, Trump is high class. And I'm certainly, there's certainly nothing wrong with a middle class politician making good. But
That's not white trash. That's perfect. That's the American dream.
But the Biden family, this is an abject travesty. Essentially, they have conned the American people for the last 50 years. And
but then they had the
think,
biggest con, though. They had the ultimate con, because living in Philadelphia when I was working down there, Biden, I'm talking in his 40s, whatever, was a joke then. I mean, he was only got it because I think Clyburn gave him South Carolina and the Democratic apparatus. He was still 3% Joe. The guy was, and even one of the debates, he's like, yes, we must punch and punch and punch away at domestic violence. And people started cracking up because I'm serious. Oh, God, brutal. So we'll see how it plays out.
Yes, we will.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lopkin. Always a pleasure. We'll be back next week. And if our listeners would like to give their input, they can do that, can't they?
They can. You can contact us through the Carnivore Radio Facebook page. You can go to xvadio.com/connect and let us know what you're thinking. And of course, you can catch every episode at xvadio.com/podcasts, the Carnivore Radio website, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and other platforms that respect freedom of speech.
Thank you, Dr. Lopkin, and thank our listeners.
We'll see you next time.